This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. Today, with a Valentine's Day theme, since Valentine's Day is coming up, I'm going to knit some little heart pillows. Now, these can be used for pincushions, Christmas ornaments, sachets, and they can be made from really tiny. This little one is only 16 stitches on the standard gauge machine, to very large. You can make a 100-stitch pillow. In fact, I've made a 100-stitch heart pillow and filled it with rice. I used real wool for the yarn, and it made a great rice bag as a heating pad. So let's get started and just make a little small one. I'm using my Studio 860 mid-gauge, but I've made these on the bulky machine, the standard machine as well. And you really don't need a fancy machine for this. This is pretty much any Japanese machine, and it'll do the job. You want to start by casting on over 20 stitches with a few rows of waste yarn. Then you can either use ravel cord or use the loop method, which is what I'm doing right now. You just pull out a loop on one end of the waste yarn, which will make it easier to use it as a ravel cord on the last row, and knit across. Then that loop is just left dangling. Cut the other end of the yarn and go ahead and put a clothespin on those two bits of yarn. With my waist knitting in place, I'm changing to the garment yarn. This is a variegated pink, white, and mint green yarn that I thought would be really cute for this. And I'm going to go ahead and knit 5 rows. Now I'm going to make the point of the heart. To do the point, I'm going to short row narrower and narrower rows as I work, so I'm going to decrease. I have my Russell lever set on number 1, or on a brother machine you would slip the hold lever over to H. And I have these wonderful weights that are just great for short rowing. See, they just have 2 little teeth. I'll keep those handy and you can see how I use those. But I'm going to short row all the way down to only 2 needles and work. And each row, when I pull out another needle, it knits a row that is 1 stitch shorter. Now, after a while, the middle is longer than the sides, and it does need some weight. So here I am with those little 2-tooth weights. These are just great for short rowing. And I put them on either side, a little bit in from the needles that are pulled out. And I'll have to keep moving those as I work. The cool thing about this little heart is it only has 1 seam down the center and then a tiny bit of mattress stitch on each side. And you don't have to do a bunch of difficult curved seams. It's the short rowing that makes all that shaping for you. Now, as I move in, I move my little weights in. Until I really am hanging them right in the center of the work. When I get down to 2 stitches, I like to just stack those little weights right in the middle. And I'm going to start increasing now. Now, I've played with this, and you don't want to do the shortcut increasing. You want to actually wrap the first needle, bringing the yarn under it and pushing it back halfway. You get a better looking edge on your heart by taking the extra second to do that each row. I actually stuffed my tiny hearts with orts. That is, little pieces of yarn from my knitting room trash can. I always have little chunks of waste yarn that can be unraveled that make great stuffing for these tiny projects. If you go on my blog, I will go ahead and post the recipe for an assortment of heart sizes. Now, after you have knitted the entire width and you've done your increases, you could take a peek and see the little point that has formed. You are going to do 5 rows plain again. Now be sure to do this. This is the one thing I tend to forget, is the plain rows after I get my point. Now we're going to make the 2 bumps for the top of the heart. So these needles opposite the carriage go into hold. We're going to knit this side first, and you're going to short row down just like we did on the point. And for the bumps, we're going to short row down to 6 stitches. So it's done like before, but only on half of the needles. And that is 6 right there. It's a really good idea to move the weights up in here. And now I'm going to do increases. I have to do 4 increase rows to get this half of the needles all back in work. After you get this half back in work, put these back halfway and knit across to get to the other side. Then put this half of the needles from 0 over into hold and short row this side. Time for my increases. Now, I like to finish the heart by knitting 1 row across all the stitches. Then I cut my yarn, but I leave a long enough piece for sewing the heart together. And I've got some sky blue yarn to use for scrap yarn. I'm taking this off on waste yarn. Waste knitting is such a great stitch holder. And I find the waste knitting to be a little bit less of a bother if I clip it so that it's fairly short. And now I can take the knitting off the machine and show you how this folds up into a heart. Put my thumb in the little point. That's the bottom of my heart. Fold these 2 little humps down. That's the top of my heart. Just like that. And this needs to be sewed together. First I'll flip it so that the wrong side is out, and I'll roll this waist yarn under. I'm going to put a row of Kitchener stitch from here to here, and to begin that I'll just go through this first loop peeking between the blue waist yarn stitches and go across to the other side and get the first loop on the other side. Draw that up, adjust it a little bit. Now I can continue on across. I'll simply go from with my needle in the next stitch and then back to the same stitch. Draw that up. You want to draw it up about the same amount as the tension of the knitting, so that the Kitchener stitches are the same tension as the knitting. In other words, not tight. This has to be loose. I go in a new stitch and back to an old stitch. Of course, I have a video that is just about Kitchener. This is just like closing a toe on a sock. This is a technique that we all use constantly for finishing our knits and having a beautiful invisible seam, or sometimes people call it a graft. So I'm going to continue my Kitchener and work all the way to the other side and then show you the next step. Now once I have that seam sewed, I need to turn it inside out. Actually, it's going to be knit side out. There's a little hole on each side of the heart that is big enough for you to stuff this thing around. So now this little fella is knit side out. And you want to remove this waist yarn. One side of the waist yarn can simply be unraveled. The other side of the waist yarn needs to be clipped and yanked. So, remember that loop I started at the beginning? I want to find that, get my scissors and clip it close to the work. Then go to the other end and grab the end and pull that right out. That brings the waist yarn off. If you've done a good job on your Kitchener stitch, look, there's an invisible seam there. You can scarcely see where the seam is. Now I need to sew one of these little sides up, and then I can stuff my stuffing in through the other side of this thing. There just happens to be a piece of yarn hanging out of each side of the little heart, and I'm going to sew this up pretty quickly using mattress stitch. If you need to master mattress stitch, of course, I have a video about that. I'm doing a 1-row mattress stitch. I just like it a little better for tight spots. Now here I am stuffing it with some unraveled waist yarn that I found in my knitting room trash can. What I was thinking this little heart might be fun for is I thought I might poke some diaper pins in it, and it could be tied on a baby shower gift instead of a bow. And here I am sewing up that last side. So here's one more little heart pillow. Hope you'll try this. This is a great little short rowing lesson and a fun thing to do for Valentine's Day.